everyone, I'm Elaine Chow.
And I'm Trist Curless.
And welcome to the Musician's Loop.
Loop, like a drum loop?
No, like the kind of thing that a jeweler uses to evaluate gems.
Oh, like a magnifying glass, like what we'll do on this podcast, actively listening to music like a musician.
That's right. And every week, we are choosing a track to dive into together and share our thoughts about what we find intriguing about the song.
Whether it's songwriting, chord progression, instrumentation, recording technology, arrangement, whatever, we're looking at the music we love through the lens, or the loop, of decades in the music industry.
Hey, Trist, what do we have this week?
Oh, we have a classic big band era tune with a vocal group. You know, I love that.
You know, I love big band.
Yeah, so this one is cool because it's back in the style that they used to do like this. A lot of times the lead vocal or the group wouldn't even come in for like 2 minutes.
Okay.
That is the case today. We have On the Sunny Side of the Street, Tommy Dorsey and the Sentimentalists.
Ooh, I've never heard of this one before, so I'm really looking forward to listening to it. All right, so before we get into this, can you remind our listeners how we should be listening to things as a part of the Musician's Loop community?
Well, we are always thrilled to have you join us. And we also encourage just the highest quality listening you can. In our crazy lives, we don't always stop and take the time to listen to the best thing available. Although these days, man, everything sounds really good compared to what there was back in the day. Nay, I digress. So improve your listening situation if you can, although today's golden oldie might not necessarily sound all that much better in any different setting. So listen as you will, but do know that there is a vocal group on this. If you start listening and you listen to the whole song through and there's no vocal group yet, you just have to wait. Be patient. It's not like now where the best part has to come within like a minute of the song or 30 seconds or something crazy.
All right, so we are going to take a brief pause. We'll leave all of the links in the show notes, and we will be right back. Wow, that was definitely very classic big band.
Yeah, it's about as signature as you can get. Just the mutes on the horns and everything. It could be any stereotypical drop it into a movie scene that needs that kind of era music, and you could use this track. Well, it has been used many, many times. As a matter of fact, I wasn't going to get to it yet, but the Manhattan Transfer re-recorded it, and it was in the movie A League of Their Own. With Tom Hanks and Madonna, the women's baseball movie. So they had 2 songs in there. One was a little more prominent, but yeah, they basically just did a redo of that exact version. They liked it so much, they copied that one and did it for Penny Marshall's A League of Their Own movie.
What an amazing little tidbit there, and a great connection to your past for sure.
Yep, I loved that one. When we were kind of coming down the home stretch doing the final tour with a big band, I was strongly pulling to have that one be in the repertoire, but there was just so much music to try to get in, and so the concert wasn't 3 hours. We couldn't do everything, but I tried. I love that one.
Okay, so tell me a little bit more about why you chose this song.
Well, while, again, like we said, it's very indicative of this era, this style, the pacing, the band playing the entire form first and then the vocal group coming in, rather than focusing on a vocal group being the feature right out front and doing lots of iterations of it. So that's very typical, but the voice, they just sound so good. Of all of the things from this era, it's just one of the most swinging, just perfect example of this thing for me. And there's lots of great ones, but this one always stands out. The first time I heard this version of it, I was like, whoa, that's so good. And the little story behind the Sentimentalists is that Tommy Dorsey had hired the Clark Sisters. So this was a vocal group from, I believe, North Dakota. Somewhere big, like where I'm from in Wyoming. See, all the good jazz singers come from there, right in the middle of nowhere. So they had their group and they auditioned for him, and he had learned from a prior issue with the Pied Pipers, another big band era vocal group, very much a predecessor to what the Transfer did. Manhattan Transfer very much copied and loved the style and the sound of the Pied Pipers. Well, the Pied Pipers were the vocal group for Tommy Dorsey. Tommy Dorsey fired one of them from, I think, something like on tour, told him the wrong direction to get on the train and made him mad and fired him. And so the rest of the group in solidarity also quit. Well, they were called the Pied Pipers, and that was their name. He didn't own it, so they could continue on and be the Pied Pipers and be amazing and be stars. And he couldn't do anything about it. So he thought, I won't do this again. Instead of letting them be the Clark sisters, he named them the Sentimentalists. And then when they finally left, because of course they weren't getting paid what they thought they should be paid, tale as old as time, right? They couldn't even publicly say, well, we were the Sentimentalists, so come to our concert because you've heard us all these times with Tommy Dorsey. So they had their own name back, but that name wasn't as popular as the Sentimentalists. Anyway, I find that fascinating that all those years ago, this kind of thing was still an issue.
And that is interesting to think about both from the business perspective, and I understand why Tommy Dorsey did that. But going back to something that you said earlier, when you're talking about the vocals, like, first of all, I heard all women's voices, definitely. Certainly when I was listening to the arrangement, I was hearing a lot of complexity in there. I was hearing multiple voices. And then occasionally I would hear them go down to unison, which was also gorgeous. And the thought of using unison as a punctuation in some way, which is interesting to think about, because we do that now, because definitely that is something that we do as arrangers nowadays. We continue to use octaves as a way of punctuation, and also unison as a manner of punctuation as well. And the other thing that occurred to me as you were sharing was just the phrase North Dakota. And part of it was that I recently watched Singing in the Rain. In the 1930s, 1940s, the Mid-Atlantic accent was the primary accent in all of broadcast. And so hearing this very Mid-Atlantic tonality to their voices was very nostalgic for me, because nowadays we have a very, I'd say, neutral American accent, which is equivalent, I think, to the Californian accent because of the influence of Hollywood. So I think that there was something that was incredibly nostalgic for me, because the Mid-Atlantic accent just harkens to a specific era of musicianship, of radio, of broadcast. And all of that, I think, comes out in that North Dakota accent.
The group of singers was just amazing. A little more complex 4-part chords and those voicings. Again, same with the Pied Pipers, very much the style that you ended up hearing from the Manic Transfer. And these 4 sisters, obviously that's the other thing, is when they're related, the groups that are brothers or sisters always have some kind of magic over the years. There's been a lot of those, but the Clark sisters were no different. And yeah, you're right, their ability to very easily segue between the harmony parts and then going into octaves or unisons, being able to do that easily and adeptly was one of their features. It was really great.
So one of the things that I would like to talk about apart from their voices is the orchestra itself. Very classic big band. And as I think about big band, you were talking about mutes. I certainly heard like the Harmon mutes, the cupping, the type of really classic jazz big band functionality. But I also was hearing a lot of strings in there. And so there were strings, there was brass, there was a kit drum. And I really didn't hear anything else. Was there anything else that you heard in there that really stuck out to you from a big band perspective, or was that it?
No, that's pretty typical, especially with recording, because a lot of times they're on radio shows back then, and there'd always be a kind of a full string section as well as horns. I know you said kit drum, but it sounds like you just say kick drum whenever you say that. So there was a drum kit.
That's right.
That includes a kick drum and kind of a full radio orchestra, as it were, often on these things. Yeah, strings are really kind of in the back. Matter of fact, only now when you mention them do I even intellectualize that they were even there. They're the synth pad of today. So in current music production, a lot of times what replaces just some strings in the back playing long whole notes, over on a synthesizer you'll have a patch that's strings or something that's really kind of ethereal, and behind even really rhythmic aggressive pop songs you'll have these big pads of just whole note chords that are played on keyboards. So the predecessor to that would be having a full string orchestra, even though you're not hearing necessarily string parts jump right out at you and taking the focus. They help fill the sound, make the recordings just sound fuller and bigger.
I love that you were saying that this was radio ready, because I went down the rabbit hole of looking at all of the radio technology during this time. And one of the things that I was thinking about was the lack of dynamic range that radio had during this era. And if we think about the difference between AM radio and FM radio, I don't know if you have listened to music on AM radio recently, but it definitely sounds very much like this in terms of the quality of music that you find. Just like the lack of highs, the lack of lows, it really is great for voices and for talk radio, which is why so much of it is on AM radio. I'd like to hear what some of your thoughts about the technology and how it influenced how people perceive music, especially over the radio. It was like the equivalent of television back then, right?
Interesting. I haven't really thought about that. The people that are there when it's being recorded, they're hearing this full spectrum, but I think because of the transmission and recording technology only captured so much, that then when the AM radio was the way to transmit it, you weren't losing anything because the recording quality wasn't as good anyway. So that kind of matched until eventually when FM radio came around and this frequency spectrum was greater, which I do not claim to really know anything about or exactly when that happened, but it would be able to accommodate more audio quality as it progressed as well. I think all of those things feed each other. So yeah, if it sounds like it's from an AM radio, it's because they have a lot of the same qualities. The recording technology then and AM radio's capabilities are likely very similar. Hopefully someone who knows more about that will chime in and let us know the differences and why they're the same and different. That would be great.
One of the things that I was thinking about as I was listening to it was not only the lack of dynamic range, but also it sounded a little bit tinny to me as I was listening to it on my studio speakers. And then I was thinking about how radio was played back in the 20s, 30s, 40s. And a lot of the older radios that I've seen have actually been wooden cabs. So they're built inside of basically wooden speakers. And I go back to when I was considering some of the PAs that I was using 15, 20 years ago, 25 years ago at this point in time, and just thinking what's the difference between a plastic cab when I was using the Mackies or the JBLs as opposed to the Yamahas, which were a wooden cab and they sounded a lot warmer. And so thinking about how the Yamaha wedges sounded with those wooden cabs and the difference with that and the plastic cabs that I had on the Mackies, I mean, it was definitely a different dynamic range. It was a different warmth that came out of those wedges. And so I'm thinking about listening to this in a speaker that might actually just give warmth because of the way that it's built. And the way that people who were listening to it probably had a lot more warmth in it because a lot of those radios were built out of wood.
Yeah, and then even in playback, these originally probably would have been on a 78 on a phonograph, and the frequency response of that was also very limited. So that all contributes to it.
I guess it goes back to how technology influences music, whether it's recording technology, or in this case, playback technology, and how we perceive it today, because now our playback technology is so high fidelity right now, whether it's our AirPods or our studio speakers or even our car speakers are better than what people had back in the 1940s, or at least different. And so as we listen to music in these different environments, we know nowadays that it just sounds different. And so if we put ourselves in the shoes of people from a different era with a different set of technology, how would we be listening to the music back then? I think that's just a mental exercise I was going through.
I guess, again, something I haven't really thought about, but if you heard this song on the radio, and this is the sound that you heard, but then you had the opportunity to go hear a band and a group like this live and in concert, what a startling difference. Even if the sound reinforcement in the room might be also older, a lot of times it's probably just accentuating some of the voices because you would hear the band just acoustically in a room, but just being able to hear the full spectrum of sound must have been magnificent. I'd never even really thought about this. If you at home and you hear this on the radio, and then, hey, next week Tommy Dorsey is going to be in the auditorium downtown, and you go down and listen to it. I guess if you've had those experiences before, you know it's going to be that different. But boy, the difference in the spectrum of sound and quality that you would hear when you hear it live. To some degree, it's always, quote unquote, better to go experience it live. But I think back then it's even a greater difference. That's really interesting to think about. I had not thought about that, Elaine. Thank you for that.
The deep thoughts that we have late at night, right?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So anything else to say about this song?
I mean, that's it. I just love it. Listen to it. We'll probably link the Manhattan Transfer version, or the next time you're flipping through and some cable channel's playing A League of Their Own and you catch it, maybe listen and see if it's on in the background somewhere and see if you hear the Manhattan Transfer singing that one, or find the soundtrack and listen to them as well. Yep, it's just a good one. Swinging, the Clark Sisters.
All right. So with that, let's move on to our next segment, which is
the mailbag. Ladies and gentlemen, the mailbag.
That's right, the mailbag. And you can get a hold of us via email at themusiciansloop@gmail.com or via Instagram or Threads at themusiciansloop. That's LOUPE.
And that would be a great place if you have some more information about anything that we've talked about, or maybe we weren't as well informed as we could be, and you could give us a few more clues about some info about this song or the group or the bands or radio or music technology. We'd love to hear any of those things, and that's where you can let us know.
Okay, so this week's mailbag is from Threads. It's a conversation between Vanessa McGowan and Dallimore Music from May of 2026. So Vanessa says, I think musicians struggle so much with social media because real connection is at the heart of what we love about music. But no matter how hard we promote ourselves online, performative social media connection will only ever be a hollow facsimile of that. And Dallimore Music responds, this new era of content creation pressure on musicians is one of the worst things that has ever happened to the industry and goes against everything a stereotypical musician is about. Some artists are sticking to their guns and refusing to play the game, and I'm with them all the way. So I think that brings up this question, maybe this ever-present question of the relationship that musicians have with marketing. And it sounds like these two artists are very frustrated with the way that social media is, kind of even having to do marketing themselves. And I know previously we've talked about the importance of marketing and how people can and should engage in their own marketing. I'm kind of curious what your response to these two people are.
As we've covered many times before, it depends. What kind of musician? What are you talking about? You and your friends that have full-time other jobs and you just play once a month at a coffee shop? You're talking about a touring musician with a label? There's such a vast difference in the way that musicians perceive they need to interact on social media. It's tough for me to necessarily comment depending on what level the music is at, what kind of band, what kind of act. And it depends on the act. Some acts are looking to have as big an audience as possible and make as much money as possible. And some are just looking to get to play music now and again. And so they achieve different things by using social media. But as we've also said many times, it's always been the case that you've needed to let people know about your music and you've had to find ways to do it. It's just now there are different ways to do it, and it falls to the musicians. And even if on a label there is someone that might be hired, or even an independent musician can hire a social media specialist that helps them. It's the way that we're doing things. You can choose other ways to gain audience. Maybe people just from word of mouth of being at the concerts. I guess that's going to be a little slower. But even then, I suppose people that were at your concerts that loved it, they'll go on social media and talk about you. So in a way, you're using it even if you're not directly using it. So the refusing to play the game part, I'm not sure what that is.
I think that when I read these two posts, especially back to back, I definitely hear the frustration there. Because in an idealistic world, you shouldn't have to promote your music. You make something good, people should be able to listen to it. But I also think that there is an aspect of pragmatism, and I am, if nothing, a pragmatist, and thinking about Well, for a lot of music, there is a business aspect of it. If you're trying to get people to attend your shows, there is some form of marketing. Just like if you want people to consume your art, you have to let them know about it, whether it's like a visual media or a multimedia, some other kind of media. I think the other alternative, though, is to show up at festivals where other people promote you, and then you don't have to do any of it yourself. Although there is a lot of quid pro quo where they are expecting you to also promote things on behalf of the show itself. So I think that in some ways it is, what is your relationship with your fans and how do you maintain that relationship? Because it is a two-way street. They come to see you, but you're also sharing with them things. If they're unaware of what you are doing and when you are doing things, they're never going to see your shows. How are they going to find things out? And so we've talked about mailing lists, which again is another way to keep in touch with your audience. It doesn't just have to be social media, but we think about acquisition funnels. We think about how do you partner with others? How do you tour with others and help others discover you, and vice versa? Help your fans discover other music as well. And so I think even before social media, you and I were both making music before social media. I think this is something that, whether it was we went out and we did flyers all over campus, like I definitely remember doing that. That's all marketing. That's all work. And just because social media is a different form of work doesn't mean that you don't have to do it.
True story. It's just a new way to do it. That's all.
So I think that maybe if I were to rephrase this, and I doubt that either Vanessa or Delamore will listen to this podcast, but as I think about how we approach our music, certainly there is making music for the fun of it and for the joy of it and for our own self-engagement and for the joy of making music either by ourselves or with others. But then there's also the joy of sharing music. And I think that in order to share music at scale, you need to leverage some of these other resources that you might have. And then if you're thinking about making a living at it, and certainly I don't make a living at my music, I probably have more tools because I'm not trying to monetize. My rent gets paid by my day job. I think the phrase that comes to mind is beggars can't be choosers when it comes to you live in this world. And what you were saying is this is just the way things are. We just need to do things this way because that's where the audiences are. You go to where your audiences are. And if your audiences are on social media, you got to be there. So I think that's where I land on this, is that if you are okay living in obscurity, I think to your point, if you are only playing in one venue, or if you have a special relationship with a smaller community and that's where you're playing, that's great. You don't need to do a whole lot of advertisements. People will just show up for their own reasons, and you will show up and you will play, and that's cool. But if you do want people to find out more about you and to really form that relationship, you got to find some other way of doing it.
I guess the last thing is to fill the Vanessa's first post, that the social media connection will only ever be a hollow facsimile of what you do. Well, that's on you then. Like, the whole goal to me is to not put a hollow facsimile of what you do. The tough part is to actually show really what you do and have it come through. So not allowing it to be a hollow facsimile is up to the artist. I don't think it's just fact that it's always going to be that way. I think it's up to the artist to make sure that it's not a hollow facsimile.
I love that thought. And so I think it's a great time for us to finish out here. Any last thoughts on this?
No.
I mean, it's a good place to end. So
Beautiful. Yes.
All right. So with that, we're going to close out our episode. But as we've been asking, we thank you so much. There have been a lot of people who have shared our episodes with others. We've been talking to people who have shared with family members, with other people who love music. And so that is something that we want to encourage you to do. If you like this episode, if you like one of the other episodes that we've recorded, please do share it with someone, because we are trying to grow. Certainly we're on social media, but we are also hoping to grow through word of mouth, because we know that that's the most powerful.
And as we've mentioned before, we now have playlists on all of the outlets you can check out. So just check out the playlist. Maybe send the playlist of all the songs we've done to somebody. And if there's a song that really strikes them, or even a song that they already know that they love that we've covered, maybe they'll go to that episode first. Or if you're listening now and you want to check that out, maybe you haven't listened to all of our episodes, you can listen to the songs and see which ones really hit home for you and you want to know some more about. So check those out as well.
I will say that it is definitely an eclectic list. The more that I stare at the list, the more I'm like, wow, we have covered a lot of ground in this podcast.
That's what we're going
in just
for.
about a half a year.
Indeed, that's what we're shooting for. Variety is great.
Awesome. And with that, we'll catch you next week.
Thanks.
I'll probably cut some of that out.
No, you can't. You can't. You have to leave in the stupid stuff that makes it less sterile.
I will try not to slouch, and maybe my voice will sound better.
Anyway, right when you first said it, I said, well, yeah, I mean, there's a kick drum, but there's a lot of other drums, Elaine.
I was super cute.
That's right. Right here on the radio. The mailbag.
So I've already said that.